that's where that anger at Albanese lies. It's like pulling teeth trying to get him to admit, to acknowledge, to voice the fact that there's a problem. And if you can't spell out the problem, there is never going to be a solution.
Now, as the sun set over Sydney on this evening, a minute's silence was observed exactly 1 week since two gunmen murdered 15 people at a Jewish event celebrating Hanukkah in Bondi Beach. People across Australia fell silent to honour the attack, the people who were killed in the attack, as part of a national day of reflection. In a nationwide gesture of light over darkness, the windowsills of countless homes across the country were lined with candles. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, was visibly shaken by the reception he received when he arrived at the memorial event at Bondi. So you can really hear that very strong expression of anger from the country's Jewish community aimed at Anthony Albanese's government for failing to react to warnings about rising anti-Semitism. Now, Albanese has launched a review of the nation's intelligence agencies to see what they can do better to keep Australians safe. Well, let's now speak with Noa Hoffman. Noa is the Sun's political correspondent, and she's from Sydney. Hello, Noa, can you hear us?
Hi.
Hi,
Hello.
Noa. How are you? Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.
So, look, you're from Sydney, and you must have friends and family who are still there and absolutely traumatised by what's happened.
Yeah, so my family were all at the vigil that has just taken place in what was our morning time. They're incredibly distressed. There's a lot of feelings of anger as well. But having watched, bits of the memorial on YouTube, my heart felt a bit better because it was so amazing to see people come together and instead of what the terrorists would have wanted, which is more fear, it really was a show of strength in the face of evil, and that was quite reassuring.
And were you surprised by hearing those boos against the Australian Prime Minister?
No, I wasn't in the least bit surprised because the Jewish community in Australia, in a similar way to the British Jewish community, have spent so long trying to raise alarms about an issue with extremism within Muslim communities, whether that's here in the UK or in Australia. Every time I say this, I always stress how much I'm not talking about the wonderful moderate community, but I think we do have to have a frank conversation about extremism because, frankly, that is what led to the attack at Heaton Park. It's what led to the attack in Sydney. And it's one of the biggest fears facing Jewish people at the moment is governments failing to really crack down on these hate preachers, on extremism that runs through some mosques and pockets of some Muslim communities throughout Australia and the UK. And that's where that anger at Albanese lies. It's like pulling teeth trying to get him to admit, to acknowledge, to voice the fact that there's a problem. And if you can't spell out the problem, there is never going to be a solution. There's only going to be more bloodshed. And that's why people were so angry.
And I understand that around that area there had been hate preachers being allowed to speak. Is that your understanding?
So Sydney's quite different to London in the sense that it's a lot more spatially divided. So in London, you see a lot more of different communities, whether that's ethnic or whether that's in terms of poverty. Everyone is sort of like woven together throughout a lot of areas of London. But in Sydney, it's a lot more divided. And a lot of the extremism is actually nowhere near Bondi. It's in separate parts of Sydney, particularly Western Sydney, whereas the Jewish community lives around Bondi and Eastern Sydney. But what my family and what Jewish people were actually seeing in the wake of the war in Israel and Gaza were people coming over from Western Sydney, making that 45-minute, 1-hour drive to sort of stick up pro-Hamas slogans and tear down flyers of hostages. And we also saw the sort of spray painting of stars and just this total influx of anti-Semitism, which came from people who either weren't local or the Australian authorities even believe could have some connection to Iran. So it's really scary for this tiny community that's so used to just going about like their own business and not disturbing anyone. And now they're dealing with this huge threat that just seems larger than anyone could ever imagine, and larger than anything that they're used to.
Of course, it was such a horrific attack, and so frightening, the footage of it. And do we know anything more about this father and son?
Um, I don't think we have any other major developments apart from the fact that they went to the Philippines and received some sort of ISIS training. But I think that's where the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, wants to focus a lot of attention, which is fair. There does need to be a reckoning when it comes to security agencies and joint up information sharing. Again, it's an issue that we see with policing here. But I think what the community is really trying to press is this idea of looking at the pockets of extremism where they exist on a really just local basic level, even if that's in some schools, if that's in local mosques, if that's in within civil society of some Muslim communities. That's where they want the focus to be, and they feel like that plea is just not being heard.
And look, what do you think are the lessons that we need to heed here in the UK? Obviously, we had that horrible attack at a Heaton Park in Manchester. Do you feel like there's been much progress since then? Are you worried that something else could happen here in the UK?
Yeah, everyone's worried. And I think there is very legitimate concerns that a lot of Labour MPs do not want to confront this problem because of a fear of backlash at the ballot box. And my understanding, speaking to some Muslim friends, is that within some parts of the Muslim community, there is a fear about speaking up against anti-Semitism. Because, you know, they might be scared of backlash by these extremist preachers who can be quite powerful. And so it's actually quite scary for some of them to do that. And so until we have that really wide acknowledgement, and until we have some sort of real reckoning with social cohesion and parallel communities where, you know, I mean, if I have to be frank, I would be quite scared being visibly Jewish in bits of Bradford and Birmingham. And I know that's a horrible thing to say, but it's just the truth. And that shouldn't be the case in the UK. And I think until we get to grips with why that's happening, and until we get to grips with being able to change that, another terror attack like Heaton Park or like Bondi could very well happen.
I mean, I do agree with a lot of what you said. I mean, I'm from a Muslim background myself, and I don't think we do hear enough moderate Muslim voices out there who, by the way, I would say the majority of Muslims absolutely have, you know, do not want anything to do with these extremists, these Islamist sort of murderers and terrorists. And it brings trouble to the door of ordinary peaceful Muslims who are trying to go about their day, and now they're, you know, getting spat at and attacked and this, that, the next thing. So I think there's a huge number of moderate Muslims that hate this stuff as well. But I do agree with what you've said. I think for a lot of people to speak out about it, they get a lot of pressure and they get a lot of pushback from their own community, and some of those extremists who are community leaders will push back against them. And I think that's a real shame. And I think we have to sort of try and platform the voices more of moderate Muslims, and I include myself in that. But look, what do you think the way is forward? Because you mentioned the words community cohesion there, Noa, and I think that is so important. And community cohesion feels incredibly fractured right now, of course, because of what's been happening in the Middle East, which is very, very difficult. And you can have sympathy for all the different sort of, you know, sides involved. But what do you think the government should be doing or can be doing to try and improve community cohesion? Because this isn't some fluffy sideline issue anymore. This is really important. It's becoming a matter of life or death.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you say, Aisha. And I think Jonathan Friedland, the Guardian columnist, puts it so well when he says actually the biggest victim of Islamic extremism is moderate Muslims. If you're looking at how many people have died off the back of it, it's moderate Muslims who have suffered the most in terms of an actual death count. It's so hard to think where to even begin with this issue, but I think education is so important. Really making sure that from a very young level, people are not just stuck within education systems where they are only existing among one community. And to be fair, applies to ultra Orthodox Jewish communities as well in Stamford Hill, where everyone is just incubated in their one community, where they're not learning about all the different cultures and how to sort of get along and to be temperate and moderate where there's disagreements. So that's really important. Second thing is, I don't know why we don't have stricter rules with, where possible, deporting extremist preachers, because a lot of them are not even British citizens. And that goes back to huge problems with the Home Office and the broken migration system as well. And then, of course, there's the issue with the marches. And I want to believe that a lot of people on the marches are there because they genuinely are humanitarians and care about the suffering in Gaza. But it became increasingly hard to believe that enough people on those marches were there for genuine reasons when you saw just how visceral and just how spiteful these slogans were, and also dangerous and really, in my opinion, often incitement to violence as well. So I think there needs to be a multi-pronged approach, but where we all already see the sort of very small acts of pushing back against this type of division and extremism is in wonderful multi-faith initiatives. Unfortunately, they're just so small in number, nowhere near visible enough and nowhere near well attended enough. So I think really there needs to be a counter-extremism strategy at the heart of government. The government still haven't even announced who their new counter-extremist advisor is since Lord Wolney was taken away from that job. So there's an empty vacuum there, and that desperately needs filling.
Absolutely, and it's going to be interesting to see how Shabana Mahmood deals with this as well, because she is wanting to be very tough, and I think she may be an interesting person to deal with this. She is, of course, as an observant Muslim, but she will be wanting to crack down on this. But I think this job of extremism and community cohesion, it's such an important government function right now. Noa, as ever, a pleasure speaking with you. Have a lovely Christmas. Thanks very much for your time. That's Noa Hoffman, who is the Sun's political correspondent, talking to us there.